Steve Harvey was standing at center stage, doing what he did best, making families laugh and keeping the energy high. The studio lights were bright, the audience was warmed up, and everything was running like clockwork. 2 families had been selected for this episode, and the producers had already briefed Steve on the basics. The Henderson family from Memphis, Tennessee on one side, the Garcia family from San Antonio, Texas on the other. Standard setup, standard game, nothing out of the ordinary. Except nothing about this episode would be ordinary. Steve adjusted his suit jacket and walked toward the Henderson family first. They stood in a line, all smiles, matching navy blue shirts with white lettering that read, Henderson Strong. There was David Henderson, 52 years old, a broad-shouldered man with a military haircut that had never quite grown out even after all these years. Next to him was his wife, Patricia, 50, a kindergarten teacher with warm eyes and a laugh that could fill a room. Then came their 3 adult children. Their eldest daughter, Keisha, 28, worked as a physical therapist. Their son, Carlos, 24, was finishing up his business degree. And their youngest daughter, Monique, 21, had just started her career as a dental hygienist. Steve shook hands with David first. "Welcome to Family Feud, brother. You look like a man who's seen some things." David nodded with a humble smile.
"Yes, sir. 22 years in the United States Army. Retired as a master sergeant."
The audience erupted in applause. Steve stepped back and led them in showing appreciation. 22 years. Come on now, let's hear it for this man. The applause grew louder. David looked almost embarrassed by the attention, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Thank you for your service, man." "Seriously," Steve said, placing a hand on David's shoulder. "We don't say that enough in this country." Steve moved down the line, greeting Patricia and the children, cracking jokes about family dynamics and asking who was the competitive one. Keisha raised her hand immediately, which got a laugh from everyone. Then Steve made his way to the other side of the stage where the Garcia family waited. They wore matching red shirts with Garcia Gang printed across the front. There was Carlos Garcia Sr., 50 years old, also with that unmistakable military bearing. His wife, Maria, 48, stood beside him, a retired nurse with a gentle demeanor. Their children included their eldest son, David, 23, who worked as an electrician. Their daughter, Davida, 21, was studying to become a social worker, and their youngest son, Miguel, 21, Davida's twin, was apprenticing as a carpenter. Steve approached Carlos Sr. with his hand extended. "And what about you, sir? Tell me about yourself." Carlos Sr. shook Steve's hand firmly. "Carlos Garcia, sir, also retired Army, did 20 years before hanging it up." Another round of applause filled the studio. Steve looked between the 2 families with raised eyebrows.
Now wait a minute. We got 2 military families today? 2 Army families?
He looked at the audience. "Y'all, this is about to be the most disciplined game of Family Feud we've ever played. Nobody's going to be late for their turn." The audience laughed. Both families chuckled. Everything was light and easy. "All right," Steve said, gesturing for the 2 family patriarchs to approach center stage for the face-off. "Let's get our first 2 players up here." David Henderson walked forward from the left. Carlos Garcia walked forward from the right. They met at the podium in the center, the buzzer between them, ready to compete. And then everything stopped. David was reaching out for a handshake when his hand froze midway. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Carlos had extended his own hand, but now he was staring at David with an expression that shifted from confusion to recognition to absolute disbelief. "Wait," Carlos whispered. "David? David Henderson?" David's voice cracked. "Carlos, is that you, man?" For a moment, neither of them moved. The studio went quiet. Steve looked between the 2 men, his producer instincts telling him something significant was happening. The audience sensed it too. That particular kind of silence when everyone collectively holds their breath, and then both men lunged forward and embraced. It wasn't a polite hug. It wasn't a back pat between acquaintances. This was the kind of embrace that only happens between people who have shared something profound. Carlos, buried his face in David's shoulder. David held on like he was afraid to let go. Both men were shaking. Steve took a step back. He touched his earpiece, communicating with the control room. "Hold everything," he said quietly. "Let this happen." The cameras kept rolling. Patricia Henderson had her hands over her mouth, tears already forming. Maria Garcia was clutching her chest, looking at her husband with a mixture of confusion and emotion. The children on both sides were exchanging bewildered glances. When David and Carlos finally pulled apart, both men had tears streaming down their faces. They kept their hands on each other's shoulders, looking at one another like they were seeing a ghost. Steve approached slowly, carefully. "Gentlemen," he said softly, "I can see something powerful just happened here. You want to tell us what's going on?" David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. He shook his head and gestured for Carlos to explain. Carlos took a shaky breath. "Steve, this man right here. This man was my best friend. We served together at Fort Hood back in '97. We were in the same unit for 3 years. We did everything together. And I mean everything." David found his voice. "We were inseparable, man. When you're far from home, when you're going through things that are hard to explain to people who weren't there, you lean on each other. Carlos was my brother. Not by blood, but by bond." Steve nodded slowly, his usual showman energy replaced by something more reverent. "So what happened? How'd you lose touch?" Carlos looked down. "Life happened. I got reassigned. David went to a different post. This was before everybody had cell phones and email was easy. We wrote letters for a while, but addresses changed. I got married, had kids, moved around. He did the same. I tried to find him," David added. "For years, I tried. But Garcia is a common name, and I didn't know where he'd ended up. Eventually, I started to think maybe I'd never see him again." Steve was quiet for a moment. The audience was completely silent. Someone in the back was audibly crying. "How many years?" Steve asked. "How many years since you've seen each other?" David and Carlos looked at each other, doing the math. 24 years, Carlos said. "Almost 25. If you were meant today. Almost 25. Almost 25. End quote. David, 24 years. End quote. Steve exhaled slowly. 24 years, and you run into each other on Family Feud. He shook his head in amazement. God works in mysterious ways, don't he? The audience murmured in agreement. Several people were wiping their eyes. Steve looked at both families, then back at the two men. "Hold on. I got to understand something here. Y'all both got families now. Introduce me again. Tell me about your people." David turned toward his family. "This is my wife, Patricia. Been married 26 years. Best decision I ever made." Patricia waved, still emotional. "And these are our children. Keisha, she's 28. Monique, she's 21. He paused when he got to his son. "And this is Carlos. He's 24. Steve's eyes narrowed. "Wait, your son's name is Carlos?" "What?" David nodded, fresh tears forming. "Named him after my best friend, the brother I thought I'd never see again." The audience gasped. Carlos Garcia Sr. put his hand over his heart, looking at the young man who bore his name. Steve turned to Carlos Sr. "What about your family? Tell me about them." Carlos Sr. gestured to his wife. "This is Maria, 23 years of marriage, and she still puts up with me." Maria laughed through her tears. "And these are our kids. My oldest son. His name is David. He's 23. Now it was David Henderson's turn to react. His hand went to his mouth. "You named your son after me?" David asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Of course I did, brother. How could I not?" Carlos replied. "And my daughter, she's 21. Her name is Davida." Steve actually had to take a step back. Hold on now." He looked at the audience, then back at the families. "You're telling me that both of you named your children after each other? Without knowing? Without being in contact?" Both men nodded. "We made a promise," David explained. Back when we were young soldiers, before either of us was married, before we had kids, we said that if we ever became fathers, we'd name our children after each other. We said we'd be godfathers to each other's kids. Carlos continued. And we kept that promise, even when we lost touch, even when we didn't know if we'd ever find each other again. We kept the promise. Steve had to take a moment. He pulled out a handkerchief and dabbed at his eyes, not even trying to hide his emotion. In all my years of doing this show, I have never witnessed anything like this. He turned to the young people on both sides of the stage. Carlos Henderson, come here, son. The 24-year-old walked to center stage, looking nervous but moved. And David Garcia, you too. The 23-year-old joined them. Steve stood between them, an arm around each young man. Do you boys understand what just happened here? Your fathers loved each other so much, believed in their friendship so deeply, that even when life separated them, even when they had no guarantee they'd ever meet again, they named you after each other. That's not just friendship, that's family. Carlos Henderson and David Garcia looked at each other. Then, without any prompting, they embraced. Two young men who had never met, connected by a bond their fathers had forged decades ago. The audience lost it. People were standing, applauding, crying. The energy in the studio had completely transformed. Steve raised his hands to quiet the room. Now, I gotta make a decision here as the host of this show, because we got a game to play, but we also got a moment that's bigger than any game. He walked over to his podium and picked up his question cards, looking at them thoughtfully. Here's what we're going to do, Steve announced. We're going to play Family Feud. That's what y'all came here to do, and that's what we're going to do. But I want both families to understand something. Whatever happens on this board today, whatever the scores are, you've both already won. The families nodded, still emotional, but ready. All right, Steve said, his energy shifting back to game mode, while still carrying the weight of the moment. Let's play the feud. David, Carlos, y'all still up for this face-off? The two fathers looked at each other and grinned. 24 years apart, and they fell right back into their old competitive rhythm. Oh, I'm ready, David said. You know I'm ready, Carlos replied. Steve laughed. Now that's what I like to see. Here we go. Top 6 answers on the board. Name something a husband might claim he's better at than his wife. Both men's hands hovered over the buzzer. The tension was playful now, charged with decades of friendship. Carlos hit the buzzer first. Grilling, he said confidently. Steve pointed at the board. Show me grilling. The number 2 answer flipped over. The Garcia family cheered. All right, Steve said. Garcia family, you want to play or pass? Carlos looked at his family. Maria nodded. We'll play, Steve. Let's go then. Maria, you're up. Name something a husband might claim he's better at than his wife. Maria thought for a moment. Driving. Show me driving. Number 1 answer. The Garcias celebrated. The Hendersons applauded graciously. The round continued with the energy that Family Feud was famous for, but there was something different underneath it. Every time the families looked at each other across the stage, there was warmth instead of rivalry. When someone got a strike, the other family encouraged them instead of celebrating. When someone gave a funny answer, both sides laughed together. Steve noticed it immediately. Y'all know you're supposed to be competing, right? This is the friendliest feud I've ever seen. David Henderson shrugged. Hard to be enemies with family, Steve. The game continued through the first round, which the Garcia family won, then into the second round, where Steve asked, Name something you might see at a family reunion that makes you smile. Keisha Henderson was at the podium against David Garcia Jr., the young man who was named after the man who was standing next to the woman he was competing against. The connections were almost too much to track. Keisha buzzed in first. Grandma's cooking. Show me Grandma's cooking. Number 3 answer. The Hendersons chose to play. Patricia stepped up next. Steve grinned at her. Mrs. Henderson, you've been married to this man for 26 years. You've been watching him reconnect with his long-lost best friend. How you feeling right now? Patricia's eyes glistened. Steve, when David came home from the army, he used to talk about Carlos all the time. For years. Carlos this, Carlos that. I used to tease him that Carlos was his first love. The audience laughed. David Henderson looked embarrassed but pleased. And then life got busy, Patricia continued. Kids came, jobs changed, and he stopped talking about it as much. But I could tell he never stopped missing his friend. To see them together now. She couldn't finish. She just shook her head and smiled. Go ahead and give me an answer, sweetheart, Steve said gently. Old family photos, Patricia said. Show me old photos. Number 5, answer. The game continued. By the third round, the score was close. The Hendersons had rallied, and now both families were within striking distance. Steve posed the question to the family patriarchs again, a rematch of their opening face-off. Okay, this is for control of the round, Steve said. Top 7 answers on the board. Name a reason someone might cry at a wedding. David and Carlos stood at the buzzers, but they were both grinning at each other. Just like old times, Carlos said. Don't think I'm going to go easy on you, David replied. Steve laughed. Come on now, focus up. Name a reason someone might cry at a wedding. David hit the buzzer a split second faster. Thinking about family members who couldn't be there, David said. The answer was personal. Everyone in the studio felt it. Steve pointed at the board slowly. Show me missing loved ones. Number 1 answer. The Hendersons erupted. But David didn't celebrate. He turned to Carlos. I thought about you, you know, David said. At my wedding, when I was standing up there waiting for Patricia to walk down the aisle, I thought about how you should have been my best man. Carlos nodded. I thought about you at mine, too. I kept looking at the door, half expecting you to walk in. Steve had to intervene before the game fell apart entirely. All right. Y'all are going to make me ruin this suit with all these tears. Henderson family, you playing or passing? They played, and they won the round. Going into the final round, the Hendersons were ahead, but not by much. Steve gathered both families at center stage. Before we do this last round, I want to do something, Steve said. I want the children to talk for a minute. Carlos Henderson, David Garcia, Davida Garcia. Y'all are walking around with names that carry a whole lot of history. What does it feel like to be here right now? Carlos Henderson, the 24-year-old, spoke first. Growing up, I always knew I was named after someone important to my dad, but he never fully explained why. I think it was too painful for him to talk about losing his best friend. Now I get it. Now I understand the weight of my name. David Garcia Jr. nodded. Same for me. Dad would tell stories sometimes, late at night, about this guy named David who had his back through everything. I always wanted to meet him. I always wanted to know if I was living up to the name. He looked at David Henderson Sr. Sir, I hope I'm making you proud. I hope I'm the kind of man you'd be glad to share a name with. David Henderson walked over and pulled the young man into a hug. Son, you're here with your family, working hard, loving your people. That's everything. That's all any of us can hope to be. Davida Garcia wiped her eyes. I never knew there was a female version of the name David until my dad explained it. He said he wanted me to carry the name because the man he knew was loyal, brave, and kind. Those were the qualities he wanted for me. Steve let the moment breathe. Then he clapped his hands together. All right, final round. This is for the game, but more than that, this is for the story. Let's see what these families are made of. The final round was intense. Both families brought their best answers. There were moments of triumph and moments of dramatic misses. When the Garcias got 2 strikes, the Hendersons had a chance to steal. When the Hendersons struggled with an answer, the Garcias rallied. In the end, when Steve read the final scores, the Henderson family had won by just a small margin. But something happened that had never happened before on Family Feud. The Garcia family started cheering just as loud as the Hendersons. Wait, Steve said, looking confused in the best possible way. Y'all just lost. Why are you celebrating? Carlos Garcia Sr. laughed. Steve, look at this stage. Look at what's happening here. I found my brother. My children met their namesakes. Our families are connected forever now. You think I care about a scoreboard?
David Henderson jumped in. Besides, whatever we win, we're splitting it anyway.
Patricia and Maria both nodded in agreement. Apparently, the wives had already discussed this. Steve threw his hands up in amazement. In all my years, y'all are something else. The fast money round went forward with Keisha and Patricia Henderson representing the family. They played brilliantly, racking up points and finishing with a winning score that secured the grand prize. When Steve announced they had won $20,000, the celebration was unlike any other. Both families rushed center stage, hugging and jumping and crying all at once. The Henderson and Garcia children were already exchanging phone numbers. Patricia and Maria were making plans for a joint family dinner. David and Carlos stood slightly apart from the chaos, watching their families merge into one. 24 years, David said quietly. 24 years, Carlos agreed. We got a lot of catching up to do. Carlos nodded. We got all the time in the world now. Steve Harvey walked over to them, putting an arm around each man. Gentlemen, I've hosted this show for a long time. I've seen surprises, I've seen drama, I've seen just about everything, but I've never seen anything like what happened today. You showed everybody watching that real friendship doesn't expire, that promises made in your youth can last a lifetime. That family isn't just about blood, it's about bond. He looked into the camera. For everyone watching at home, let this be a reminder. That person you lost touch with, that friend you've been meaning to call, that relationship you think might be too far gone to repair, maybe it isn't. Maybe all it takes is a moment, a chance encounter, a willingness to reach out. Steve turned back to the families. The Henderson family won $20,000 today, but both of these families won something money can't buy. They won each other back. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. As the credits prepared to roll and the production crew began their wrap-up procedures, David Henderson and Carlos Garcia remained at center stage with their families surrounding them. Same time next year? David asked with a grin. Carlos laughed. Brother, you're not getting rid of me that easy. Not again. We're doing holidays together, birthdays, everything. Deal. They embraced one more time. Steve Harvey watched from his podium, a smile on his face that was different from his usual television grin. This one was deeper, more personal, because this was what Family Feud was really about. Not the points on the board, not the money in the bank, but the moments when families come together, when old bonds are renewed, when life gives you an unexpected gift wrapped in the middle of an ordinary day. The stage lights dimmed. The audience filed out. The cameras stopped rolling. But for the Henderson and Garcia families, the real story was just beginning. Two fathers, one stage, 24 years apart, and a friendship that proved stronger than time itself. Some things are worth waiting for. Some people are worth finding. And sometimes, the game you came to play turns into the moment that changes your life. That's the real feud worth fighting for. The feud against distance, against time, against all the things that try to separate us from the people who matter most. And on that day, in that studio, love won. It always does.